We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS is bringing you the latest news from a revolving world, alongside The Globalist. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 14th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, China's Xi Jinping heads abroad for the first time this year. We'll examine whether this is a strategic charm offensive or an effort to circumvent the US trade tariffs. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes.
Esta jornada ha sido histórica. Esta victoria ha sido histórica también.
We'll have the latest on the Ecuadorian presidential elections, where the incumbent, Daniel Noboa, has won another term in office. Plus, Turkey positions itself as a smart power. We'll have the latest on the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, where the country wants to place itself as a problem solver. But with Russia in attendance and the country's main opposition figure in jail, we'll examine just how much good Turkey can really do. And
oh, Mr. Confectioner, please give me Toblerone.
we'll find out why Switzerland is making a comeback on Toblerone's packaging. Plus the papers and the culture news too. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in today's news. The US has warned that exemptions from import tariffs for some electronics goods will be short-lived. Ukrainian officials say 34 people were killed in a Russian missile strike on the city of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine. And Hong Kong's once thriving opposition Democratic Party is moving forward with plans to dissolve its operation in response to continual pressure from the Chinese authorities. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, the Chinese President Xi Jinping is making his first trip abroad this year, and he's visiting China's nearest and dearest. On the itinerary are state visits to Vietnam, Malaysia and Cambodia. The visit comes days after the Chinese leader called for building a shared future with its neighbouring countries. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by Adam Hancock, a journalist based in Singapore, and by Patricia Thornton, Associate Professor in the Politics of China at the University of Oxford here in the UK. Very good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Adam, this is a sign that the neighbours are very much China's priority at the moment. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this trip has been on the cards for a few weeks for President Xi. It wasn't just immediately announced after President Trump's reciprocal tariffs were announced, but the timing is certainly interesting. And I'm sure Beijing did know that countries like Vietnam, for example, would be in the crosshairs for the US president because of the size of the trade deficit that they have with Washington. So it's no surprise, really, that China has organized this trip. It's a bit of a charm offensive. The three countries that have been chosen, they do already have good trade ties with China and good diplomatic ties as well. But I think it shows really that China is taking this very seriously, this trade war obviously causing chaos around the world at the moment. And it's a real opportunity for Beijing to show that in this region, they can provide a stable trading partner. I'm sure that's the message that President Xi will be trying to get across over the next few days. They may also sense an opportunity as well, because these economies, they're very reliant on exports to the United States, and that is obviously going to take a hit because of these tariffs. So I'm sure President Xi will be offering Beijing as an alternative and trying to secure some deals.
Patricia, let's go a little bit deeper on this one. The idea of that China now becomes an even stronger and louder voice in the region, given what's happening with Donald Trump and his narrative on tariffs.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, that is part of what Xi Jinping is attempting to do. It is very much an attempt to whip up support regionally. And of course, when Xi Jinping moves on to Malaysia in a few days, Malaysia is now holding the Secretariat of ASEAN, which is the regional trade bloc. And he's going to try to inspire people or other member states to join some sort of a coalition effort and issue some sort of a denunciation against Trump's tariffs.
And Adam, just let's look at each country in turn. Patricia's just briefly mentioned Malaysia, but the first stop is Vietnam. And Vietnam has already been hammered with, 46% tariffs. It doesn't want to shoulder the burden of any repercussions from China trying to use it as a conduit nation. There is a sense, isn't there, that China would like to stay on good terms with Vietnam because it can actually use it as a sort of an export base.
Absolutely, yeah. Vietnam finds itself in a very interesting position. It's kind of towing a fine line between both the United States and China. I must apologize, by the way, for the drilling in the background, which just started next door, unfortunately. But it will continue. Yeah, they have for a long time now looked to be a friend to both, really, which is not the easiest position to be in. Obviously, they've been hit by really high tariffs from the United States, and they're trying to negotiate the way out of that at the moment. So they'll be careful not to cozy up too close to China during this visit. But you make a great point that they have benefited hugely, particularly during President Trump's first term, when he hit China with tariffs. And a lot of Chinese manufacturing, it was moved south to Vietnam. The north of the country was completely transformed. I did a story in a place called Haiphong, which is effectively the town built on tariffs because there was just so much business as companies look to manufacture there rather than China. And obviously, President Trump is aware of this. This is why he's really gone after them. So they've got a fine balancing act. It's something they've managed to do over the years, but obviously they've been hit by 46% tariffs. So they're aware that the United States is negotiating with them and watching them closely.
Indeed. And just building on that a bit, Patricia, the idea that Vietnam, a communist one-party state on the one hand, wants to be a high-income nation by 2045. And much of this has been driven by the exports, which Adam has just talked about. So it needs to keep China very much on side, doesn't it?
Yes, and Xi Jinping has been playing to that in the run-up to his visit. He's referring to and hailing Hanoi's leaders as comrades and brothers and emphasizing their historical friendship. But of course, Vietnam also has a trade deficit with China that is quite significant. The trade deficit for last year was over 80 billion US dollars, which was up from about 50 billion US dollars in 2023. And then there's the additional issue of if they continue this close trade alliance or relationship with China, one of the issues is the flooding of the Vietnamese market with Chinese-made electronic vehicles, which is already threatening to overturn their own attempts to build a higher tech, a higher value-added set of industries, as you've just said.
And Adam, moving on to Cambodia with the third stop in Xi Jinping's tour, it is again another strong ally. And it's just upgraded a naval base. So Cambodia as well, very much tied into China. Are we looking at the beginning of a more permanent pivot away from dependence on the United States? It would be a huge move, but it would be essentially what Donald Trump wants to happen in terms of relationship with trade relations, at least with China.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly could be a strong case for that with Cambodia. As you said, they have got a very close relationship with China, probably the closest or one of the closest relationships across Southeast Asia. And really, for them, this is less about shoring up diplomatic support as stuff and more about getting money flowing into the country from China and making sure that there are trade deals on the table, because the US tariffs could be absolutely huge for Cambodia if these reciprocal tariffs do kick in. I think they were up to 49% for Cambodia. And that's going to devastate their garment industry. It's 750,000 workers are employed in that industry in Cambodia. And they're exposed really because of their exports to the US. I think it accounts for about a quarter of Cambodia's GDP. So if they are going to be hit by nearly 50% tariffs, and they have such a strong relationship with Beijing, this certainly could be an interesting visit to watch, because this could be a country that decides to pivot away from the United States, pivoting towards China. And as you mentioned, that is something that Donald Trump is looking for. His whole idea, obviously, is bringing manufacturing back to the United States away from places like Cambodia. So I think this one will be a particularly interesting piece of this visit to watch.
And Patricia, given the news in the last 12 hours that the US says that exemptions from import tariffs for some electronics goods will be short-lived, that's in response to the pausing of the tariffs at the end of last week, following the imposition of harder tariffs a few days before that, which have sent the markets into a sort of situation of yo-yo. But the more that Donald Trump starts changing his mind and changing tack, does that take some of the teeth out of his threats and gives China a little bit more confidence?
Well, what it certainly does do is it destabilizes global markets. So overnight, while most of us were sleeping, Trump seems to have released a new message on his social media platform, Truth Social, in which he's now claiming that the tariffs, although they might have seemed temporary, are just moving from one bucket to another, and that he's still going to go after China. Now, China had earlier responded to the announcement that the tariffs on electronics would be temporary by saying that was a small step. We're looking for a bigger step. But now it looks as though Donald Trump, whose policies have been nothing if not mercurial, has destabilized that again. So we're still waiting to hear how China is going to react to that. But certainly, China is going to be trying to portray itself as the more stable member in the global trade alliance. And I think they've got a very good case to make there.
Adam, finally, we don't see Xi Jinping on the road very often. I mean, I think it's 12 years since he was last in Malaysia, 9 years since he was last in Cambodia. Are we now going to see or predict that he will be much more of a visible face in that part of the world, given the fact that that part of the world just it looks like it's just getting on with its own thing independently and it's pushing the US to one side?
Yeah, I think if Beijing see this as the moment that they can really capitalize on what the United States is doing and the uncertainty that they are causing, then I think we definitely could see Xi Jinping out and about in this part of the world a lot more over the coming months, over the coming years, because if they think this could be the moment to wrestle some of that control from Washington, then I'm sure they will act on that. Because obviously it's not just about economic relations. This is an extremely important part of the world strategically. It's a very important location, and China has long known that. They will be looking to build defense ties with countries, as we mentioned about the naval port in Cambodia, for example. And obviously they do have disputes with these countries as well, largely around the South China Sea. That's a common theme with the Philippines and Vietnam, for example. So I think if Beijing sense that this is a real moment, that the tide could turn, that they could really exert their authority in this part of the world, then I wouldn't be surprised. It wasn't that long ago that Xi Jinping last went to Vietnam. He obviously sees it as an important partner. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see what his travel schedule looks like in the coming months now that there's so much uncertainty and countries are looking around for other trade partners.
Adam Hancock in Singapore and Patricia Thornton from the University of Oxford here in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist. One 13 a.m. in Quito, 7:13 a.m. here in London now. Despite the closest of first rounds, Daniel Noboa has comfortably won another term in office following this weekend's presidential elections in Ecuador. In a vote seen as a referendum on his so-called war on drugs, the right-wing Daniel Noboa defeated his leftist candidate, Luisa Gonzalez. To tell us more and bring us up to date on the results, I'm joined now by Chris Sabatini, Senior Fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Emma.
Thank you for coming in. The margin of victory, Noboa's won by more than 1 million votes, was significantly larger than was expected.
Yeah, it's funny because according to polls coming up into the election, they were pretty much neck and neck. Now, Luisa Gonzalez is claiming fraud and wants a recount, but it's not clear she'll get one. She has to prove that there was fraud, or at least enough evidence to trigger that recount. But yes, it is a bit of surprise. I think in part, though, it really is that security issue he had, the power of incumbency. He's only been in power for 16 months before this because he was replacing the previous president. But there were some advances in terms of security. The last couple of months have not gone well for Ecuador. There's been over 700 murders because of drug-related violence. But I think he was standing on his legacy of addressing the public security concerns, especially after the horrific attacks about a little more than a year ago in 2024.
The context here in Ecuador is that it was once seen as one of the safest countries in Latin America, wasn't it? But now has an appallingly high homicide rate. And Noboa was trying to place the armed forces at the center of, I think it was a policy that he called his iron fist, wasn't it?
Yeah. Mano dura. He was a hard hand, literally. Ecuador has always been sort of isolated from all the other conflicts of its neighbors. The guerrilla conflict in Colombia, the narcotics trafficking issues in Colombia and related violence in Colombia as well, the same in Peru. And because of that, it never really developed the police or army capacity to address security issues like its neighbors. So when after the peace accords in Colombia, after some of the pushback on the guerrilla groups in Peru, a lot of that activity moved to Ecuador, and Ecuador's police and armed forces simply weren't prepared to be able to deal with it. But also what came with it was a large transnational criminal element. The Mexican cartels are in Ecuador. They're working with local Ecuadorian gangs, as is the Albanian mafia. So it's become really a center point for the shipment of cocaine, largely to Europe, in fact.
And Noboa has responded to this, but he's done it in quite a controversial way, let's say, in the last 24 hours, because just before the election, he declared a 60-day state of emergency. I mean, what was the thinking behind that?
Again, security was the number one concern among citizens and voters, given the horrific levels of violence. But he clearly, again, he wanted to demonstrate he was getting tough on crime. He also invited recently Eric Pence, the head of Blackwater, the private military group, a mercenary group, effectively, and pledged to work with them. In fact, his security detail is made up of Blackwater employees. So he was trying to sort of demonstrate that not only is he getting tough on crime with local officials, he's bringing in outsiders to really crack down in a tough way. That I think is a mistake. You can't address a local problem using international mercenaries.
Let's talk about the woman he beat, Luisa Gonzalez, a leftist candidate. Just looking at the first round, it was a tiny, tiny margin, which I think it was 16,000 votes, which separated them. I mean, Noboa won by those 16,000. Nonetheless, it was tiny. What was it about Luisa Gonzalez which seized the energy at that point, which she subsequently has clearly lost?
I think in part it was that violence had ticked up in early 2025. So there was a sense of that his policies were not delivering. There was also, because there was a large a field of candidates, even though the margin between them, the two leading candidates, Gonzalez and Noboa, was small. There were a large field of other candidates, and some of them, I think their voters broke for Noboa in ways that surprised people, including the indigenous party, canny, which has had a long-standing beef with the founder of Luisa Gonzalez's party and her mentor, Rafael Correa. So I think a number of those votes broke for Noboa in his favor, and then widened this margin much more than people expected.
Will, therefore, there be a much stronger move to the right now that Noboa finds himself comfortably winning? Where will the country head now?
Well, first, the Congress, the single-chamber Congress, is evenly divided. There's just about one or two seats divide Luisa Gonzalez's party from Noboa's party. So he's going to have a difficult time passing. But, he did, shortly after the attacks in 2024, he did convene a national referendum giving him extra constitutional powers to conduct crime. So I don't think it's beyond him to go to referenda to be able to govern outside the Congress if he feels he's being stymied because of the divisions within the Congress.
Finally, while I've got you here, Chris, let's talk about the president of El Salvador. Again, another strong man. We've seen those images of prisoners being deported to these incredibly strict and brutal prisons in El Salvador. He has welcomed the deportation of prisoners to his country. He's in Washington today. Are we looking at a pivoting more to the sort of the culture of the strongman that is coming directly from Washington, but also is is being inspired by the likes of El Salvador and also in Ecuador?
Yes, we are, Emma. I think what we're also seeing is sort of, a plan to build sort of a Trumpist alliance in the image of Trump. You've got Noboa, for example, attended Trump's inauguration. He visited Mar-a-Lago. Javier Milei, the president of Argentina, visited Trump. He's the first elected president to visit Trump after his election. And now Bukele. But also you have Jair Bolsonaro, the self-declared Trump of the tropics. He's indicted right now for a coup attempt for questioning the results of the election that he lost. But his sons were recently in Washington, too, urging the White House allegedly to impose sanctions on the justice who had indicted their father. So, we're looking at really a very partisan form of intervention in favor of strong men, and they're all men, in Latin America right now with Trump.
Chris Sabatini, Senior Fellow for Latin America at Chatham House, thank you as ever for joining me in the studio. Still to come on today's programme.
The Polish diagnosis of Russia, the Polish diagnosis of the post-communism was right. We were right. Talking to the Western countries, be aware of Putin.
The deputy head of the Polish Senate tells Monocle Radio about the country's newfound confidence. Stay with us on The Globalist.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates, each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights, and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
It's 7:21 here in London. Let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Zoe Grunewald, who's a Westminster editor at The Lead. Good morning, Zoe.
Good morning.
How's Monday looking in the Grunewald world?
It's all fine, It's the sun is shining, the sun is rising earlier as well, so it's a positive day, I think.
Yes, we're all feeling rather positive this morning. Actually, we do need to talk to you briefly about let's start about the fact that for as a covering a political beat here at Westminster, you will have an extraordinarily busy weekend just past, won't you?
Yes, so that's absolutely right. We know that Parliament had an emergency Saturday sitting to pass some legislation concerning British Steel, and this is after crunch talks between the Chinese-owned company that owns British Steel and the government fell through over the last week, meaning that the government is now has given British Steel the opportunity to deploy emergency measures to save the blast furnaces in Scunthorpe, and this is all about the future of British Steel, because without it, the country's ability to produce its own virgin steel is called into question.
The background to this is the accusations is that British Steel has a Chinese owner. And the Chinese owner has been trying to offload British Steel, but at a price that no one would even countenance. And there is a fear that that the Chinese are trying to break the UK's ability to create steel from scratch. And it's suddenly now got this incredible race against time that they've got to keep the furnaces going. They have the Navy accompanying the fuel that keeps the furnaces burning, because once they're out, they never come back.
That's right. Yes, it really is a kind of race against time. And the business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, was on the media round yesterday. And he couldn't give assurances that the blast furnaces would necessarily be able to continue despite government intervention. And of course, this has got concern across the spectrum, not only about what this means for Scunthorpe, which is a town based around British Steel, but also what it means for our ability to produce our own steel, our reliance on foreign powers to give us that steel. And of course, steel is the basis of all these infrastructure projects that the government wants to create. It also is the basis of our ability to defend ourselves, to create weaponry, to invest in our own infrastructure. So without British Steel, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister's whole ethos of, the country becoming more self-sufficient in the face of changing foreign powers and defending itself and all of that is really called into question. So this is kind of existential, really, for the UK.
Indeed, and also in terms of its relationship with the rest of the world. I mean, just bringing your attention to the article in The Guardian, which you've sent to me to say, like, this is what we want to talk about. The Guardian worked out yesterday, or revealed that targeting parts of China's security operations under new security rules or foreign influence rules could come in. So this could turn into a longer, deeper conflict or war or problem with China, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost this is almost a canary in the coal mine kind of situation for, more broadly. Does the UK want parts of its critical national infrastructure owned not only by foreign powers, but of course by Chinese powers? And this is going to be an interesting one because there are, of course, increasingly changing foreign threats, but equally the UK's economy is in dire straits, and the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has been to Beijing to court foreign investment in UK infrastructure and projects. So there is a real conflict here between what the UK economy wants and needs, but also our critical national resilience.
Let's move on to another story which has been covered for the last 24 hours and will be moving all week. US and Iran holding nuclear talks in the last 48 hours. This is, again, is it and the moment when the United States tries to seize control of a narrative?
Yeah, so this is interesting. This is the highest level meeting between the two nations since 2018. And it was in Muscat in Oman, and obviously it was done through a kind of Oman intermediary. But what is interesting is both sides, both Iran and the US, have said that the meeting was constructive, it was peaceful, that respectful language was used. That's what Iran's lead negotiator, the foreign minister, told Iranian state TV. The US team was led by Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff. He didn't apparently reiterate some of the president's threats that Iran would face great danger if the dialogue did not succeed. And this is, of course, all off the back of the US pulling out of the arrangement with and the deal with Iran in 2018 over concerns that Iran was building or enriching its uranium to create nuclear weapons. But it feels like both sides are wanting to move forward now. Iran doesn't want to lose its capacities to build its nuclear, but the US obviously wants assurances that this isn't going towards nuclear weapons specifically. And previously this was also about ballistic missiles as well. So there's still a far way to go, but this seems to be a slight thawing of the chilled relations that we saw last time Trump was president.
A quick look at The Guardian as well with a different story. Hungary poised to adopt constitutional amendment to ban LGBTQ plus gatherings. The continuation of a very strong trajectory that Hungary is taking.
Yeah, so this was the Hungarian lawmakers will vote on this controversial amendment today. So this is all about codifying the government's recent ban on pride events, also giving authorities the ability to use facial recognition software to identify attenders and fine them. It kind of is almost in the Russian playbook of, these laws that are said to prioritise the protection of children, but also enshrining the recognition of two sexes and providing a constitutional basis for denying gender identities. So obviously this has got widespread anger and contempt from LGBT groups. There's also concerns about an amendment within there that would give the government power to suspend Hungarian citizenship for dual nationals deemed to pose a threat to the country's security or sovereignty. So this has led to lots of rights groups basically suggesting that the government is trying to legislate fear in the country and suppress dissent.
Finally, let's look at the Times. A total change of direction he wanted to bring our attention to. But they are trying to, scientists are trying to work out whether there is a connection between when we were conceived and born and what kind of future and life that we end up having.
Well, and it caught my attention because I've always found astrology very interesting, even if I don't necessarily believe in it. But this potentially suggests that there might be, as there often is with any of these things, a small grain of truth. Increasingly, academic studies are finding a connection between when we were conceived or born and our adult lives. So they say, for example, if you were conceived in winter, people who are conceived in winter are more likely to have low brown fat tissue, which often means they are less overweight, less prone to obesity. People who are born in summer, so in June, July, August, they tend to be healthier. They tend to have more, and they think this is due to their mothers getting more vitamin D when they were being when they were in their kind of formative months in the womb. Apparently, people with September birthdays are particularly good at sports, which actually, in my experience, rings true. I mean, I'm definitely not a September baby. But unfortunately for me, who is a Maytime baby, apparently spring is the worst time to be born. You're far more likely to get things like autism, schizophrenia, diabetes, heart failure, Parkinson's, although they say you are probably more likely to have an overly positive temperament. So swings and roundabouts, I guess.
Let's blame the parents. Zoe Grunewald, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. The time here in London is 7:29 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson, and look now at what else we're keeping an eye on today. The US has warned that exemptions from import tariffs for some electronic goods will be short-lived. China had welcomed the move by the US to eliminate some duties, but in a post on social media, Trump said they were just moving to a different tariff bucket. Ukrainian officials say 34 people were killed in a Russian missile strike on the city of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine. It's the deadliest attack on civilians so far this year. 2 Russian missiles targeted the city centre as people were gathering to mark Palm Sunday. A powerful armed faction in the south of Syria has announced it's disbanding and integrating into the country's armed forces. The forces known as the 8th Brigade, led by Mahmoud al-Auda, played a part in the overthrow of the former President Bashar al-Assad. And Hong Kong's once thriving opposition Democratic Party is moving forward with plans to dissolve its operation in response to continual pressure from the Chinese authorities. Many of the party's members are either in prison or in exile. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now on The Globalist, time for a look behind some of the news headlines we're following here at Midori House. Here's Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief Simon Bouvier with his assessment of why South Korean shops are taking over the French capital.
What brands do the French favor, and what does it say about who and what they admire? Well, French market research firm Opinionway recently published its annual survey of France's favorite brands. Unsurprisingly, in a country that takes special pride in the homegrown, from baguette to fighter jets, the top 30 is dominated by French companies. That includes the winner, French ballpoint and lighter manufacturer Bic. But at number 2 for the second year in a row is a foreign company emblematic of its homeland's growing clout in France, Samsung. The South Korean electronics giant skyrocketed from the middle of the pack to the podium last year and has consolidated its position, with French consumers associating it with reliability and innovation. Its rise in the esteem of the French mirrors their growing affection for all things South Korean, especially in Paris. As they have elsewhere in the West, South Korea's cultural exports have exploded in popularity. But Parisians seem especially keen. Perhaps the most spectacular example of this was a huge game of 1, 2, 3 Soleil, or green light, yellow light, red light, on the Champs-Élysées. It was organized in December last year for the launch of Season 2 of Korean Netflix sensation Squid Game, and 10,000 people gathered to watch the 500 contestants clad in the show's iconic green tracksuits. But that's not all. Locations specializing in Korean cosmetics have been popping up all over Paris, as have Korean restaurants, which have doubled in number in just a few years. All this benefits South Korea's image as a country tremendously. The number of tourists traveling from France to South Korea, for example, in 2024 was up a whopping 48% compared to 2023. In France and all around the world, the land of the morning calm has been adept at applying the recipe that the United States had so much success in using as a global goodwill generator: accessible, star-driven entertainment and innovative brands. At a time of rising, Trump-driven boycotts of American goods across Europe, is South Korea the new soft power sheriff in town?
My thanks to Simon Bouvier in Paris there. For more from Monocle's editors and correspondents, sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. Now, Michał Kaminski is the Deputy Marshal of the Polish Senate, the upper house of parliament in Poland, and has been at the forefront of his country's politics for decades. He served as head of media relations for the former president Lech Kaczynski and even founded his own political movement. Well, with Poland facing presidential elections next month, Kaminski spoke to Monocle's Julia Lassica, who began by asking him what Poland is doing to keep the United States, under Donald Trump, on its side.
We are spending a lot of money. We are fulfilling all the requirements for a good partner of United States of America, which Donald Trump set up for allies of USA. And actually, Trump is mentioning Poland in a positive way a couple of times, underlining the fact that we are paying enough for our defense. And I would like to mention also that much of the money, the big part of the money we are spending of our defense, we are spending in the United States.
Are there conversations that are being had about national security? Some countries are not willing to spend with the US anymore. Is that a conversation that's being had in Poland?
No, we are actually, that's a bipartisan agreement in Poland, which is a far-reaching compromise in the Polish society, in which we are all agreed that the defense spending is of the crucial importance for this country. So there is no political force in Poland, serious or not serious, which is questioning the actually Euro-Atlantic direction of Poland and the high spending on defense. Right now, this year, we have a 13th budget of defense in the world.
You mentioned the mental role that the US plays in Poland. I think that's a very specific, very unique way of seeing the US's role, the role they play in your country's internal affairs. Could you unpack what that phrase means for you?
Well, not only for me, for the, let's say, a common thinking of a Polish nation, the fact that United States is our allies is very significant. We are all counting on American support. We have this feeling that our liberation in 1989 was possible thanks to the policy of Ronald Reagan and of the United States. I don't think that there is a single Polish family with no roots in USA. I mean, with no family members in USA. I don't think that there is a single family in Poland with no connections to the United States of America. We are all making jokes that Chicago is the second largest Polish city, which actually is true. So that's something which is so important for Poland that even the idea of being anti-American is impossible in political terms in Poland.
And of course, you have a very important presidential election coming up in May. Can you tell us about why this is so important? What is at stake?
That's very important from, obviously for Poland, but it's from the geopolitical perspective, because if Donald Trump will get in Poland a president who will be actually sharing his views on many issues, it will be a significant change in the internal architecture of European politics, because you will add to the, let's say, Trump column in Europe a very important country.
And do you see signs already of Donald Trump wading into that debate, or can you see how he might? What should we look out for?
Obviously, he criticized already Polish Prime Minister. We are actually not expecting it. We want to be a sovereign state, and I said it openly in Poland. I don't want to anyone to be involved in Polish politics. I think that the Polish president should be elected in Poland, not in Washington, Brussels, or Moscow. But I think that political influence of any statement of Trump, of any support from the Republican Party to the particular candidate in Poland could be of significant importance. And we saw it already in German elections. And I don't think that it is reasonable to expect that Trump will not use the opportunity which he will have in Poland.
You have been so instrumental to so many important moments in modern Polish, political history, peace, your role in founding peace, and so on and so forth. Can you tell me about the way you've seen attitudes towards Poland on the international stage, and also the Polish feeling about the role they play on the international stage, specifically in Europe? How have you seen that change Has Poland become more confident, assertive? What has been the change?
I think that Poland, first of all, become much more richer. And this is the factor which is changing a lot also in Polish minds. Because we are not more a country which is looking for help. We are also not the people who are looking for help anymore. And we are now facing the problems with immigration. So we are now facing the problems of modern and developed societies, which is actually the question of immigration of foreign workers is becoming very, very important in Poland. So we changed our position, not only as a country, but as a society, from the country which had this feeling that is the sick part of Europe, is the worst part of Europe, and is the undeveloped part of Europe. Now, many Poles have a feeling that we are in avant-garde of Europe on many areas, from working on cyber reality, let's say, to even to safety on the streets. That's something which really makes Poland now a very attractive place to live. For dozens of years, for generations, Poles were emigrated from Poland abroad. Now we have this phenomenon, even in UK, Poles coming back to Poland, and actually other people coming to Poland. And politically, the fact that we already are playing an important role in the European Union, we have a strong military, we have a strong military budget. And also today, I think that we have a feeling that we were right. The Polish diagnosis of Russia, the Polish diagnosis of the post-communism was right. We were right. Talking to the Western countries, be aware of Putin, be aware of imperialistic Russia. Not buy, the cheap vodka and all this stuff they are selling as a good mother Russia and so on. It's not a good mother Russia. I've been in Bucha 3 days after liberation. So I saw Ruski Mir in my own eyes. And we were warning Europe because we know it. Every Pole knows what Russia means. And that's, I think, that also gives us this kind of self-confidence. We were right.
And that was Michał Kaminski speaking to Monocle's Julia Lassica. You're with Monocle Radio. Just nudging 9:41 a.m. in Antalya, 8:41 in Zurich. Now, while his main rival made his first appearance in court on terrorism charges and a crackdown continued on protest, Turkey's president was putting on a major display of peaceful international relations this weekend. From Friday to Sunday, Recep Tayyip Erdogan held meetings at the Antalya Diplomacy Forum with high-level figures from the likes of Sudan to Sierra Leone, Hungary and Syria. He also used an address at the event to say that Israel is abusing human rights. To tell us more, I'm joined now by Hannah Lucinda-Smith, Monocle's Istanbul correspondent. Good morning, Hannah.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us. Just remind us of the purpose of this forum, please.
Thank you. Well, this is the fourth year that officials have gathered in Antalya for the Diplomacy Forum. And really, it's the kind of landmark event, annual event for Turkey, as it tries to position itself and strengthen its position as a kind of mediating country in conflicts around the world. And particularly at the moment, those conflicts include, of course, the Ukraine conflict and also the Gaza conflict. And as you say, in one hand, Erdogan has this reputation as a kind of, bullish, combative figure. On the other hand, he's also trying to present himself as this figure who can do what no other world leader can do, which is to bring together countries like Russia and Ukraine, or indeed potentially like Palestine and Israel. And that's, of course, the purpose of what he was doing in Antalya this weekend.
The point you raised there opens a question as to whether this is the Antalya Diplomacy Forum or more the Recep Tayyip Erdogan Forum.
Well, here's something really, really interesting about Turkish diplomacy. What usually happens is that Erdogan very much plays to his domestic audiences. He's got this kind of, tactic of using foreign policy as a domestic campaigning tool. So we often see him giving these very, very aggressive speeches, particularly against European allies, often against the US as well, in order to kind of drum up nationalist support at home. But at the same time, what he will do also is use his diplomats, particularly his foreign minister, Hakan Fidan, to make outreach to those same countries and to keep the kind of relations going behind the scenes at the same time. But really what the Antalya Diplomacy Forum offers him the opportunity to do is to put himself into that role, to kind of build on all the legwork that his diplomats do throughout the year when he's going and he's making these kind of very aggressive speeches.
We have Israel and Turkey talking at the moment to try to avoid clashes inside Syria as they're trying to expand their influence. And so we have diplomatic activity going on between Israel and Turkey. Yet, looking at what Erdogan said this weekend about Israel, he said they were abusing human rights, they are fueling divisions in Syria, they are committing genocide in Gaza. That is not the basis that one would ordinarily take to be for good conversation and negotiation.
Absolutely. And I think, the Israel-Gaza conflict is the place where this kind of, dual-pronged strategy of President Erdogan has really, really been tested, because Palestine, he's made it into such a kind of key part of his image as a protector of Muslims around the world. He's been so vocal about the plight of the Palestinians. At the end of last week, we had a meeting between Turkish and Israeli officials in Azerbaijan, which is a close ally of both countries. So we're seeing actually Azerbaijan stepping into this kind of mediating role that Turkey is trying to take in other conflicts. So, yeah, it is a place where it's really been tested, and it is a place where, this policy of Erdogan's has really appeared to be shaky over the past year and a half, particularly certainly since October the 7th, 2023. So really it's become more and more difficult as conflicts have escalated across the region, become more complex, and also as Erdogan has sort of used those conflicts more and more in his own domestic setting.
Hannah Lucinda Smith in Istanbul, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
8:47 in Basel, which is where we head now to talk culture news. Gabe Bullard joins me on the line. A very good morning to you, Gabe. How's Basel looking?
Beautiful, beautiful.
Glad to hear it. Right, tell us about what's happening in the world of culture, loosely framed, because we're going to talk about Minecraft.
Yes, exactly. That is the long-awaited Hollywood success of the year. During the strikes recently, the sort of motto going around Hollywood had been "Survive till 25," hoping to sort of ride out the strikes and come back booming. But they did come back with Minecraft. This is the Minecraft movie is this gigantic hit in the U.S. But I think that to really celebrate it, apart from a movie for children being the biggest thing in the world right now, might be a little bit premature, because the actual biggest movie of the year so far is an animated film made and largely viewed in China. And this is showing sort of the weakness of some of the big blockbuster strategy that U.S. studios had invested in for so long, thinking they could make these, superhero epics, these movies based on video games, other intellectual property, and that they would have this gigantic global audience. Well, in fact, the Chinese film industry is now doing just fine making their own movies that gross far, far more. So perhaps maybe Hollywood could take a lesson by looking a little bit down the box office list and seeing that movies like Black Bag, the thriller from Steven Soderbergh, a new Bridget Jones movie even, have been quite popular as well. And it seems like there are grown-ups who would like to go to the theater as well.
What are the Chinese doing that's making them so successful?
I think that it's storytelling that speaks to the Chinese audience a bit more. This number one movie is sort of based in an older story, Chinese folklore. It's animated. It's They also just have a large audience in a lot of theaters that where they can start showing movies that are going to speak a little bit more to that audience instead of translated superhero fare coming from the U.S.
So when Donald Trump makes comments about the amount of Hollywood films that are going to be sent out to China, is he not necessarily getting the right point here?
I would think not. I think that we're going to see a lot of films from the Chinese film industry really take off if we start to see them spread in popularity. They do show in other countries and they are fairly popular there. But I think that this is really a blow to U.S. soft power as well. If they're not making the sort of culture that can grab the world's attention anymore, and certainly politics play into people's feelings about the United States. Maybe if they're not too happy, they won't with the country as a whole. They won't be going to see an American movie, but I think that it's looking quite bad for international returns.
I need to give a bit of a correction here. It's the Chinese who've moved to moderately reduce the release of Hollywood films in China, not Donald Trump sending fewer over. Right, we're going to talk about Switzerland in a few minutes' time, about Toblerone. But before we do, let's talk to you, Gabe, about Switzerland and its role in space.
Yeah, so Switzerland does play a large role in space. There are a number of companies launching satellites and working on space-related issues. It's a growing industry around the world and beyond the world, of course. And now Switzerland is working on a law regulating how companies could operate in space, registering missions with the UN, liability if accidents happen, all of that, because it's getting very crowded up there. There's thousands upon thousands of satellites. Some are obsolete. Some may have military purposes that aren't fully disclosed or understood. And so Switzerland wants to make sure that what they're sending up is going to be well regulated. But also Switzerland is looking toward perhaps playing a larger role in mediating outer space operations. They're very involved in the UN committees, but I think that this is the famous Swiss diplomacy, perhaps extending into space and being this sort of voice of moderation or force forward diplomacy between the US, China, Russia, and India, who are all working on these very large space projects.
And not forgetting the private sector too. What role could Switzerland play when it comes to mediation?
I think bridging a lot of these questions about the militarization of space, how satellites that perhaps are going up with civilian uses or being advertised as civilian uses it may in fact have some military applications as well, and also standardization. GPS, time, clocks, everything relies on this complicated network of satellites. So ensuring that there is some global cooperation there, and that there is a mediator who is neutral, who isn't working on militarized projects in space, is going to be essential.
Gabe Bullard, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Finally on today's programme, Toblerone is to feature Switzerland's national flag on its packaging, following a lengthy row about just how Swiss the most Swiss of Swiss chocolate really is. The company was banned last year from using a picture of the Matterhorn mountain after it announced it was moving production to Slovakia. Well, Carlo Silberschmidt is Senior Account Manager at the global brand and creative agency Wink Creative, joins us now from our studio in Zurich. A very good morning to you, Carlo. How's Du Forstrasse 90 looking?
Good morning, Emma. It's a bit of a grey Monday morning here at D90, but happy people because the Swiss have their Swiss chocolate back. Yes. I would almost say.
Just recap. Why did it go away?
So actually, 2 years ago, Mondelez announced that it would shift some of its production of Toblerone to Slovakia, meaning that it didn't qualify anymore to use iconic Swiss brand elements such as the Matterhorn mountain, which led to a redesign of the packaging and changing our Swiss mountain to a more generic one.
Right, and that didn't go down well at all, did it?
The Swiss were very, very nervous losing their iconic product. So it was a big relief when Mondelez announced that it was putting the Swiss cross back on its packaging, but also investing close to 70 million euros in a production facility in Bern that outputs up to 4 million Toblerones per day.
So this now means that when I bite into that triangle of chocolatey goodness, it will be a Swiss product that I eat now, not a Slovakian. Is that correct?
It will be a Swiss-made one if it has the cross. So the rules are still very, very strict with how you use Swissness or any Swiss-related branding elements. But what's quite clever for Mondelez is actually now they have a bit of flexibility by just adding the Swiss cross to products that are actually made in Switzerland versus products products that are made in other factories and still have lots of the brand elements, but maybe don't quite qualify for the full Swissness.
What are the cost implications for this? Because obviously the initial move to Slovakia was to save money, but to invest so much money into Bern and indeed to maintain a production system in Switzerland is not going to be cheaper. It's going to be the opposite.
Absolutely. And there's actually a very fascinating thing that happened over the last 2 years. I think on one hand, we see a shift in consumers wanting more healthy products, maybe eating a bit less chocolate. But then we also see that cocoa prices actually in the last 2 years almost exploded. Cocoa is at an all-time high compared to where we were 2 years ago. And this means it's expensive to produce chocolate, but it also means that it's more attractive to shift into a more premium segment. And that's exactly where Mondelez is shifting Toblerone to. It's becoming a more premium product. They can advertise with the Swiss cross, with it being made in the home of chocolate. And there's a very interesting number actually from the Swiss government around the use of Swissness or Swiss brand elements. And it says that you can actually see, based on various studies from 2017, that there's an increase of up to 20% on the margin and even up to 50% on luxury items by calling and claiming that things are Swiss made.
Indeed, but looking at the way that Toblerone is actually positioned in our shops, that obviously you say it's more luxury, it's more of a premium product, but it is arguably the entry level when it comes to luxury Swiss chocolate. One only need to go down the aisles of any average supermarket, and anybody who's ever been through duty free will know exactly what I am talking about. I mean, how premium is Toblerone nowadays? Even, despite having been messed around with in so many ways in terms of its branding and positioning.
Absolutely. No, it is. In fact, for long, it was a very kind of mass Swiss chocolate. We saw now the release of new products that kind of went more into the snacking category, which kind of play with the idea of diamonds, which came in smaller sizes, which all kind of should help to really reposition Toblerone in the long term and making it a more kind of desirable product for a premium market.
Carlo, just talk to us honestly about the market in Switzerland. How many Swiss people do you know who regularly eat Toblerone?
We have so many options here in Switzerland. But what's actually quite interesting is the number of different products around Toblerone we have. And we have Toblerone ice cream, which is a really, really big hit here in Switzerland.
Excellent. And what is it? And what would you? So, what's next for Toblerone then? What does it position itself as a Swiss product, or does it still have to fudge things a bit?
No, I think now as soon as the investment will be completed, we will see it be fully back as a Swiss product. What will be interesting is which other new products they will have in the pipeline. They're investing a lot into R&D. Maybe we'll see some new chocolate variations coming up to the market, and I'm sure they will have some great ideas.
Carlo Silberschmidt in Zurich. Thank you so much for joining me on The Globalist. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers Chris Chermack and Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. Chris Chermack is your host for that. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you for listening. Have a great week.